And that means that the thumping occurred at 10:52.
All right, you indicated that you placed a phone call to Rachel Ferrara at about 10:10 p.m.
Yes.
And that during that phone call, you were seated on the bed with your back up against that headboard.
Yes.
During that phone call, sir, did something unusual occur?
Yes.
And what was that?
I heard a thumping noise.
How many thumps did you hear?
Objection.
Overruled.
Yes.
3.
Can you demonstrate for us how loud it was?
Somewhat, yes.
Go ahead.
Here.
Yeah, go ahead. And so approximately what time was it when you heard the thumps on the wall?
At about 10:40.
Is that exact? 10:40?
Well, what I remember, I didn't look at the clock, but about 10:40.
Do you recall previously testifying that it was 10:40 to 10:45?
Yes.
And is that correct?
Yes.
And that means that the thumping occurred at 10:52.
You indicated that you heard the thumps at 9:40 to 9:45.
Not at that time, it was 10.
I'm sorry. 10:40 to 10:45. Thank you, sir.
And that means that the thumping occurred at 10:52.
Rachel, R-A-C-H-E-L, Ferrara, F-E-R-R-A-R-A.
Ms. Clark.
Okay, Ms. Ferrara, are you a friend of someone by the name of Brian Kalin, also known as Kato Kalin?
Yes.
Okay. And how long have you known him?
I've known him since March of '94.
And during the time that you knew him in 1994, where was he living?
In OJ's guest house.
And where was that house? What was the address of that house?
360 North Rockingham.
In Brentwood?
Uh-huh. Yes.
And had you ever visited him at that guest house?
Yes.
So you know what it looks like.
Yes.
On June the 12th of 1994, did you receive a call from Kato Kalin?
Yes.
At approximately what time?
Approximately 10:20. Approximately 10:20.
Now, did Kato talk to you about what he had done earlier that evening?
Somewhat, yes.
Did he talk to you about going to McDonald's with Mr. Simpson?
Yes.
During the course of your conversation, did you happen to ask Kato Kalin what time it was?
Yes.
And how do you happen to recall that?
Because we were going to go out and do something, and I asked him, I was trying to figure out if it was too late, and he said, so I asked him what time it was, and he said 10:30.
Now, you were supposed to go out with him that night, were you?
Yes. Well, I don't know, out, but
Get together.
yes.
And so after he told you it was 10:30, at some point after that, did something unusual occur during the course of your conversation with him?
Yes.
What was that?
Well, he described it as an earthquake. He said there was a bang on his wall.
Okay. And about how long after you'd asked the time and he told you it was 10:30, did he describe an earthquake occurring?
After 10:30?
Right. You asked him what time it was. He said 10:30, correct?
Right.
At some point after that, he described an earthquake occurring.
Mm-hmm.
How long after that time when he said it was 10:30 did he describe hearing an earthquake?
Approximately 10 minutes.
And that means that the thumping occurred at 10:52.
That means that the thumping occurred at 10:52.
As you will see, along with Robert Heidstra, confirm each other. They don't necessarily know each other, but they confirm each other as to when this barking really began. Now, they weren't laying in bed and had been asleep like Eva Stein. They weren't like Miss Elsie Testert, who was across the street, who didn't really know what was happening. These are people who are either outside or in that area who can come in here and tell you why they remember these particular times. They were wide awake, up and about, outside, around the time when this barking took place. Then we call this man Robert Heidstra. You know, because it came out that Robert Heidstra had been talking to the prosecution. You remember what he said. Now, this is the man, who's an interesting man who details cars. He's the man who is well known to the prosecution. Remember, he talked to Detective Payne almost right away during the investigations, to Payne. And he told Payne the same thing he told you during the course of this trial. Here's what he said. He says that he lives nearby, and he has these two elderly dogs, one of whom I recall was 14 years of age. So these dogs walk kind of slowly. Remember that? He walks and he takes this route. Now that graphic up there shows you the route he takes. Remember he told you he left home a little bit late that particular Sunday evening. So 10:15 he leaves home. And he proceeds on this route. And you know he's in that alleyway that runs parallel with Bundy. And he knows this neighborhood. He's been doing this for more than 14 years. He knows not only the neighborhood, he knows the dogs. He knows their barks. He knows the gates. He knows when they clank. He knows all of that. And isn't it an interesting situation? Wouldn't you have thought that of all the witnesses in this trial, in this journey toward justice, this is the only witness who ever heard any voices? But they didn't call him. You know why? Because it doesn't fit in their timeline, as you're going to see. And so he tells you that, and you recall, he's directly opposite Miss Nicole Brown Simpson's condo in that alley when he hears what he believes is the Akita start barking. And that's at about 10:35 p.m. He recognizes, he says, the Akita's bark since he walks that way, that same way, each and every evening. So while in that alleyway, east of 875 South Bundy, here's a voice yell, "Hey, hey, hey." And he says he then hears a gate slam. Now he goes on and says that at about 10:40, 10:45, he sees this white vehicle, which he describes clearly as a van or a Jeep. Now they were trying to tell you all these things about it being some Bronco, but he never said anything about any Bronco. He said a van or a Jeep. And the important part was, it's what he tells the detective, but he says it goes southbound on Bundy, away from where Mr. Simpson would live. And could you imagine in this area, in West Los Angeles, in Brentwood, the number of white vehicles there are and must be in that particular area? But the reason why they didn't call him was because at 10:45, O.J. Simpson cannot be guilty of this crime, can he? Now, how do we know that? How do we know that, ladies and gentlemen? Well, yesterday, in her zeal and advocacy, Ms. Clark tried to push the time back from 10:40 or 10:45 that Kato heard those thumps. She tried in her chart there to push it back, remember, to 10:53. Some of you probably were surprised. There's been no testimony. You brought that? And so approximately what time was it when you heard the thumps on the wall? Answer by Mr. Kalin? At about 10:40. At about 10:40.
And that means that the thumping occurred at 10:52.
Now this is the time when the dogs first start to bark over there. About 10:40. Is that exact 10:40, Ms. Clark says? Well, what I remember, I didn't look at the clock, but around 10:40. Question, do you recall previously testifying that it was 10:40 to 10:45? Answer, yes. Question, okay, and is that correct? Answer, yes.
And that means that the thumping occurred at 10:52.
Now, that's their witness. That's their witness. That's what he has to say. There's no question he's there. They know he's there. You know he's there. They don't call him. What about this search for truth? Can they handle the truth?
You can't handle the truth.
You will be making that kind of decision. And so, we then know, according to this, that by the time Heidstra sees this vehicle turn south on Bundy, Kato Kalin has already heard the three thumps on the Rockingham wall outside of his room. And you know, that's so interesting because yesterday Miss Clark tried to change how those thumps sounded. Now remember, this is something that you will never forget probably. I won't come all the way over there, but let me just see if I can duplicate. Kato Kalin said, here's how he said those thumps sounded. 1, 2, 3. Except he used that place up there. He said they were thumps. Almost like a signal. 1, 2, 3. It's what he had to say. And of course, you'll recall that. Your notes are much better than ours, I'm sure. Apparently the prosecution, in their zeal and their obsession to win, would have you believe that Mr. Orenthal James Simpson is so amazing that he can be in two places at the same time, even though they're miles apart. A search for truth. You see, their job is not to just try to convict. Their job as prosecutors is to make sure the innocent go free also, to make sure all the witnesses come to your attention. So if you accept the prosecution scenario, there's not enough time for O.J. Simpson to commit these murders, given the evidence that we understand.